Hi everybody and welcome back to Thone's Thoughts on Daniel chapter 2. The future kingdoms and nations is what this is about. It's one of the great stories in Daniel, and it's going to take a little while to do this here. There's a lot of text to it, and of course, since I am in pieces reading through the text, then that makes it longer. The commentary itself, there's only one or two fairly lengthy sections, and the rest of it is more small stuff. So we're going to have some thoughts about the future of kingdoms and nations, and so I thought that we might first think about how God relates to nations. And so we're going to read Psalm number 2, verses 1 through 12. Why do the nations rage, and the people plot a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord and against His anointed, saying, Let us break their bonds in pieces and cast away their cords from us. He who sits in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall hold them in derision. Then He shall speak to them in His watch, and distress them in His deep displeasure. Yet I have set my King on my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord has said to me, You are my son. Today I have begotten you. Ask of me, and I will give you the nations for your inheritance, and the ends of the earth for your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Now therefore be wise of kings. Be instructed, you judges of the earth. Serve the earth with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest He be angry, and you perish in the way. Then His wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are those who put their trust in Him. Okay, this is the second Psalm of David, and we learn the difference between man's views of nations and God's views of nations. David opens the discussion by asking a question which, though hypothetical, rings true in many real nations and political debate. Why do the nations rage and the people plot a vain thing? Is the question. The rage of those who do not understand is one side of the situation. The vanity is the heart of those who think they understand but really do not. Those who think that their privilege and their position is right to rule over people, if those rulings are against the law of the Lord, and the authority to rule given to His anointed authorities, see it of little matter to oppose the Lord. They throw off the control of the Lord exerts and becomes, they believe, their own authority. The Lord will be amused at first with their puny acts. He will then seriously warn them and finally punish them. However, God has placed His rulers on Mount Zion, and then the authorities to deal with them as they please and destroy them if they wish. Thus, rulers then and today should rule wisely in the fear of the Lord and in obedience and service to Him. They should act with kindness and trust in God's anointed one. So now to introduce the second chapter of Daniel. Daniel was a young man from a noble family in Jerusalem, as we remember from the last time. He was likely only a teenager when the Babylonians took captives away to Babylon. he was taken in this first group. This happened in 605 BC, shortly after the victory of Babylon over the Egyptians in the famous Battle of Carchemish. Some say that this first captivity of the brightest and wealthiest citizens of Jerusalem was really more of a kidnapping of the cream of society in order to force King Jehoiakim to cooperate with the Babylonians. I don't know that I myself agree with that statement. I'm just quoting that there are people who make that statement. So then we get right into the second chapter, and it goes on and on and on. But right now we're going to read Daniel 2, verses 1 through 13, which is about Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Now, in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and his spirit was so troubled that his sleep left him. Then the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, and the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said to them, I have had a dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. Then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give you the interpretation. The king answered and said to him, the Chaldeans, My decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, you shall be cut into pieces, and your houses shall be made as an ash heap. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts, rewards, and great honor. Therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. They answered again and said, Let the king tell his servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. The king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me till the time has changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me its interpretation. The Chaldeans answered the king and said, There is no man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such a thing of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean. It is a difficult thing that the king requests, and there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, whose dwelling is not with flesh. For this reason, the king was angry and very furious, and gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, and they began killing the wise men. And they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them. Remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? That's commonly referred to as Daniel's companions. The dream of Nebuchadnezzar could not be interpreted by the magicians, the astrologers, or the Chaldeans. It seemed that he didn't particularly trust his advisors, and thus would not tell them what the dream was about, because if they were indeed valid interpreters, they should be able to know the dream as well as its interpretation. This led to the king desiring to kill all these wise men, including those who he'd not even asked. When they came to kill Daniel, he promised that he would interpret the dream. So, the next section is about God reveals Nebuchadnezzar's dream to Daniel. And this comes from Daniel chapter 2, verses 14 through 23. Then the counsel and wisdom answered Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. He answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, Why is the decree from the king so urgent? Then Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. So Daniel went in and asked the king to give him time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. Then Daniel went to his house and made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, his companions, that they might seek mercies from God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. So Daniel blessed the God of heaven. Daniel answered and said, Blessed be the name of the God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times and the seasons. He removes kings and raises up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and secret things. He knows what it is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank you and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we ask of you, for you have made known to us the king's demand. So, breaking in here, for a brief time, Daniel convinced the captain of the king's guards to give him a little time to communicate with God. And when he would give the king his interpretation and ask his other friends for their prayer support, and he was ready. Therefore, and this is, we're now reading again, we're in Daniel chapter 2, verses 24 to 30. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, who the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said thus to him, Do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Then Arioch quickly brought Daniel before the king, and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah, who will make known to the king the interpretation. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king has demanded, the wise rulers, the astrologers, the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the later days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon the bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts come to your mind while on your bed about what that came to pass after this, and he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. But as for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation of the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. Okay, things are getting exciting here. So Daniel goes to the captain of the king's guard and reports that he was ready to interpret the dream. He also explains why the others could not do so, and gives glory to God for revealing the dream to the king, and the dream and interpretation to Daniel. And so here is the actual dream. It's in Daniel chapter 2, verses 31 through 35. You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. The great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. This image's head is fine gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You watched while a stone was cut out from without hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, and the silver and the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors. The wind carried them away so that no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Wow. Notice, there's a great parallel here between Daniel and Joseph. Both were in countries against their will. Both were able to interpret the dreams through their close relationship with the Lord. Both were able to become high officials in the government by explaining to the king what his dream was meant. Both used this position to further the needs of God's people. God's got a plan, right? In this case, Daniel explained the future major kingdoms of the world. The dream was a giant statue with a gold head, silver arms, upper abdomen brass, lower abdomen and upper legs and iron, lower legs and iron and clay feet. He also saw a supernaturally cut rock that fell upon the feet and shattered them, and all the pieces were broken to bits and blew away. The stone then grew to the huge mountain that dominated the whole earth. So now we know what the dream was, and the next section of Daniel here gives us the interpretation. And this is probably the longest reading, Daniel chapter 2, verses 36 to 45. It's the better part of a page. The interpretation of the great empires of the future. This is the dream. Now I will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. You, O king, are a king of kings. For the God of heaven has given you a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And whenever the children of men dwelt, or the beasts of the field and the birds of the heaven, he has given them into your hand, and has made you ruler over them all. You are the head of gold. But after you shall arise in another kingdom inferior to yours. Then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break in pieces and crush all the others. Whereas you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, yet the strength of the iron shall be in it, just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another. Just as iron does not mix with clay, and in the days of these kings, the God of heaven was set upon the kingdom, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall be left to the other people. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever, inasmuch as you saw that stone was cut out of a mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. This dream is certain, and its interpretation sure. Wow. Interesting. Now, let's talk about a little bit of history related to these interpretations. That is, this is what the prophecy was. To summarize the interpretation of the dream, we note that the golden head represented the then current Babylonian Empire, which was in power for almost 100 years, from 636 to 539 BC. That's basically 97 years, right? This was the empire of the captivity of the Israelites. The silver parts represented the Medo-Persian Empire, which defeated the Babylonians and was in power for just over 200 years, from 539 to 330 BC. 209 years. This was the empire which supported the Israelites' return to the Promised Land. The brass part represented the Greco-Grecian kingdom, which defeated the Medo-Persian Empire after several battles, off and on for most of the time of the existence of the Medo-Persian Empire. They were at war for the better part of the time, starting in 499 BC and containing some of the most famous battles of ancient history. For example, the Battle of Marathon, from which we get the distance running race. The Battle of Thermopylae, with its famous 300 Spartans. The wars finally ended when Alexander III, which is also known as Alexander the Great, invaded Persia and overthrew King Darius III. Thus the Greek kingdom ruled from 330 to 63 BC. This time of the Greek control was for the most part very difficult for the Israelites, and led up to the Maccabean revolt against the Greeks, who had performed many abominations in the temple. Judah Maccabee cleansed the temple after the victory there and reestablished temple worship. The revulsion to the Greek acts was important to the establishment of the Pharisees as a powerful sect, by the way. That's something we have to understand, that the Pharisees and their extreme opinion on obedience to the law grew up as the religious leaders that agreed with the Maccabees, who were very much warlike people. And so they, basically the Pharisees got sort of established as the people who really knew what God wanted, because they had been with the Maccabees and they had therefore been able to defeat the Greek Empire that was ruling the Holy Land at that time. Now the iron, and the iron mixed with clay, represents the Roman Empire. The Romans and Greeks had been battling for about 80 years when the Romans captured Alexandria, the last of the great Greek cities. Rather than being totally destroyed, the Greeks, however, just became semi-dependent part of the Roman Empire. For example, Greek was still the dominant language for many of the countries once ruled by Greece. Rome was the dominant empire from 63 BC to about 425 AD. This, of course, includes the entire time of the New Testament, the time of the early church fathers, and the unification of the Catholic Church with the secular Roman government. It is thought that the mixture of iron and clay represents this unified entity. It became the Holy Roman Empire. And it became the Holy Roman Empire when Pope Leo III crowned Charlemagne emperor on Christmas Day in 800 AD. The empire finally ended in 1806 AD during the Napoleonic Wars. Interesting that another great military leader, this whole process was sort of started by Alexander the Great's invasion, and it finally ended by Napoleon's invasion of a certain part of Europe. Now the great stone represents the coming of the final king, that is Jesus the Messiah, for his second coming, destroying the feet of the statue and causing the entire structure to collapse into rubble. And that's what we expect to happen as his 1,000-year reign begins. That is the millennium. Thus, all the kingdoms become one kingdom of the Lord. And that was a really short summary of a really large and complex part of history. But I just wanted to give you a little outline. There are literally thousands of books written on that very subject of those empires and how they came to power and were defeated. So back to the book of Daniel. The promotion of the Hebrew friends. Daniel chapter 2, verses 46 to 49. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face, prostrate before Daniel, and commanded that they should present an offering and incense to him. The king answered Daniel and said, "Truly your God is the God of gods, the Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret." Then the king promoted Daniel and gave him many great gifts, made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, and chief administrator over all the wise men of Babylon. Also Daniel petitioned the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat in the gate of the king. Nebuchadnezzar was overwhelmed by the interpretation and worshiped God for the forward glimpses of history provided by Daniel, and of Daniel's great plan, God's great plan. Daniel was also worshipped, and this is a bit of a controversial thing. Both Jewish people and Christians after that, if someone tried to worship them, there was a great clamor not to be worshipped. But we have to understand that this is Daniel in front of the most powerful earthly king that there was at that time. And he used his wisdom to put aside his abhorrence of being worshipped rather than the one true God. Sort of in the sense that, well, at least he also recognized the one true God as well as just Daniel. He was given great riches. He was put in a high office in the government as well. Daniel then also requested that his free friends be given responsible positions as well, which the king happily granted. Daniel sat in the gate of the king. This means he was in the king's court, transacting the king's business. This is a phrase that I thought that's what it meant, but I actually looked that up, and that's exactly what it means. That it's not that he, way back further in history, sitting in the gate of the city meant if you were sort of a judge kind of person. But sitting in the king's gate, that means the door that led to the king, where the king's throne room is, and that he was the person in charge of all the business there for the king. We also note that this same honor was given to Esther's cousin Mordecai by Ahasuerus in the book of Esther. He sat in the king's gate. And a more modern implication here as we end this lesson. Thus we learn lessons which are directly in conflict with the modern worldview of humanism. You say, where do you get that? Here's the reason. All governments derive their power from God. Sometimes they serve His will, and sometimes they unwittingly execute His judgment. And that was the case, for the most part, of Babylon, is that they executed God's judgment to punish His people who had been way out of line for a variety of reasons, including the fact that they were not doing the year of return and the all of the rules about returning people's goods to them and so on. The materials of the statue speak to the declining quality of human life and government as time passes. Gold, then silver, then brass, then iron, then clay. With clay, we are led back to Eden, where man was created out of clay. Think about that. That's not an accident. Our modern world becomes increasingly complex. I don't think any of us would argue with that, both with technology and with human dignity declining. Technology going up and human dignity going down. Humanists think that a man is projecting himself, but in truth, as the complexities increase, individuals have less and less understanding of who they are, why they are, and what the truth is. Thus, the only hope for peace, prosperity, and hope is the coming of the Lord to rule and reign. Then we will know peace, hope, love, charity, and most importantly, truth. And that's what the big rock that smashed the statue and then grew as big as the whole world is talking about. It's talking about this kingdom, which, unlike the kingdom of the Assyrians before the Babylonians, and then the Babylonians, and then the Persians and the Medes, and then the Greeks, and then the Romans, and so on. And then the Holy Roman Empire. All of those things lasted amazingly short times. I mean, to think, Assyrians lasted quite a while, but then when the Babylonians captured them, they only was 97 years, and then they were run over by the Medes and the Persians, who lasted 203 years. And then they were run over by the Greeks, which lasted 350 years or something. I don't remember the exact number for that. And then the Romans came, and the Romans lasted for a decent length of time. They lasted for about 350 years as the Roman Empire, and then the Roman Empire was combined with the Catholic Church, and then that's the toes, the clay and the iron together, and then eventually they sort of just went out of existence, but planted the seed for the Holy Roman Empire before they did, and then that lasted into 1806 when Napoleon stopped it. So you can see how the history goes here, and there was little time, except possibly during the Middle Ages when there was not a lot of communications between different societies. There was always war in those countries that had this empire, which funneled all the way down until Napoleon finally killed it off. But when we think about then the great rock that grew as big as a mountain and dominated the earth, that's just the hint of the beginning of what's going to happen for all of us who are saved people. I mean, we live 1,000 years here on earth with Jesus, either in our natural bodies, if we happen to have been, they either died and then got their supernatural bodies, or they were raptured and got their supernatural bodies, or a few people actually were believers and went into the millennium as believers, and natural bodies. And they're going to be real old by the time it's, that this 1,000 years is over, because all these other people have basically eternal bodies, supernatural bodies, and so then the others have natural bodies like yours and mine, only they're going to live 1,000 years plus in those bodies because they were already alive when the rapture, when the millennium began. So that's one of the important ideas as to how the future is going to come about, as given by Daniel. It's easier to understand than our last study in of the king, the Babylonian captivity, which was very difficult and had full of symbolism and other things. Daniel is to a great extent more understandable, and and it's easy to remember the story. So that completes this lesson. And it was a long one, and I apologize for that, but I didn't write it. I just presented it. So I hope to have another lesson coming up in early March on Daniel 3, and then we can sort of march through March and be more than halfway through Daniel by the time March is over. But at any rate, it's an interesting story. It's a real story, and it talks about the prophecy here. A good deal of it has already come true, and so we can sort of have confidence that the remaining bit will come true also. That is the part about the big rock. So, at any rate, I guess this is a Sunday afternoon I'm doing this. That's unusual for me, but that's the way things have been going recently. Busy, busy, busy. And so I hope that you all have had a good service this morning at church, and you all are ready for the new week, although I guess it's President's Day tomorrow in the U.S., and some people don't work that day, but some do. So if you're having an extra day off, then congratulations. If you are going to work, then just be blessed by the Lord for this week, and then you can go see Him on Wednesday night again, and you can go back and see Him definitely on Sunday morning again, and maybe shortly thereafter I'll have another lesson. So let's just pray and then say goodbye. Dear blessed Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the day, and we thank you so much for the opportunity to serve you. We recognize that this is a difficult time in history. There's an invasion of the Ukraine that's imminent by Russia. There's the COVID seems to be getting better, but then something else pops up a little bit and is a little bit of bad news too. And Lord, there's been some pretty outlandish weather here recently, all over the country really, and particularly big thunderstorms in the south and big snowstorms in the north, and we get a little bit of each, being sort of just the southern edge of the north. So I just pray that that you can bless us all as we learn your word, and bless the church that keeps your word alive and provides the infrastructure for the Great Commission. So with that said, I just pray for all those who are watching and listening, and I ask all these things in the blessed name of Jesus. Amen. So now, I guess, as I traditionally do with this one, bye-bye.